everyone. How many of you came last week to workshop number 1? Good, so who's new? Few of you, that's good too. So my name is Holly Butler. I'm the director of the DifferenceMaker program here. Last week we had a guest speaker, Nancy Saucier. Today our guest speaker is Tom O'Donnell. He teaches at the business school. He's also the director of the Innovation Hub. He's mentored teams, have really helped our DifferenceMaker teams. He was also a fellow a couple years back. So he's going to be putting on the workshop today and also next week. So are there any questions just to start? Anything about the toolkit? Anything about team making? The TeamMaker platform, anything like that? All right, so if you have questions throughout, feel free to raise your hand. We'll be happy to answer those. And then with that, I'll pass it.
Hang on, can I get the signal back?
Okay.
So we do have some trouble getting so people get on the TeamMaker, but had trouble finding the team manager. So there was some confusion actually joining the team.
The team leaders?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't sure exactly.
Okay, so the question was about the TeamMaker platform. So currently, if you go to TeamMaker, there's a list of current projects. Those are all of the teams who have actually submitted an application this year. There's another list called current seekers. Those are people who don't have an idea but want to join a team. So if you're looking for additional team members, go to the current seekers list. I think there's about 20 plus students on there. They list their skill set, they list their interests, and you can reach out to them directly and say, hey, you're a computer science major, I'm building an app. Do you want to join my team or meet, learn more about my project? I'd love if you could join me. So you know that those teams have an interest in joining teams. If you're here without an idea and you want to join a team, you can look at the current project list. And at the end, the last column says either open or full, and that means if the team is open, they're looking for additional team members. If they're full, you can still reach out. Maybe you have something or some type of skill set or interest that they want you on their team. So, and if you don't have any luck with that, feel free to shoot DifferenceMaker an email, and we'll help you and link you with other team members too.
It's gonna be fun tonight.
All right, any other questions? How many of you guys filled out the first page of the toolkit or began filling it out from last week, the problem worksheet? Does anyone have questions about that worksheet? So the toolkit is meant to help you fill in your idea plan, which is due on February 29th. So this is just another tool, another resource to help guide you through the process. So if you can fill out that toolkit throughout these next couple of weeks, when you get to the idea plan, it's going to be very easy for you to already have all that information that the judges are looking for. And you can just fill it out, the idea plan right online and submit it. So I urge you to use the toolkit. That will help you out a lot. So are there any questions about the toolkit? So who was here last week? Over here. What have you guys learned since last week in 1 week? So maybe state your name, state your project, and tell us what you've learned in the last week of more about identifying your problem.
We have more to speak about that. So our project is a weight clip that measures the passing speed of the bar.
And what's your name?
Bowling.
Okay.
Bowling. So in the past week, last week we defined the problem, and we know that,
So what's the problem?
the problem is, I guess the average athlete doesn't have access to the expensive training equipment to track, their movements during during exercises or during training. So with the weight clip, you can track certain barbell movements.
So what's the benefit of that?
The benefit is you get a visual display of what you're doing. You can see if you're doing the exercise in proper form, things like that.
Yeah, so like right now, when you do an exercise like a bench press, it might feel good when you do it, but you don't really have any metric data that you can use to see if you're improving or not. So what our barbell sensor does is it lets people have access to this data without using really expensive equipment.
So is it something that clips on you, clips on the bar?
It would be like a barbell like clip, so like it would be already something that you already utilize, but just with an extra sensor that gives you more data.
And is it linked up to a website, an application?
Yeah, so we're gonna have to build an app for
So what's your major?
MIS.
Okay.
He's in my S and I'm marketing.
Okay. So you might need a physical therapist on your team. You might need some type of health person on your team.
Yeah.
And are you focused on athletes or physical therapy patients?
Athletes.
Athletes.
So college athletes, high school athletes, as well as the average weightlifter.
Have you talked to anyone yet? So last week we wanted you guys to go out and start talking to who you think are your customers. So have you talked to anyone about it?
So a little while back,
Yeah.
I guess this idea has kind of been in development.
Okay.
So a little while back, we did a survey. We went to the gym where people were working out.
Okay.
We had them fill out surveys based on, we asked general demographic questions as well as the questions about, how often do they lift and do they feel confident in their form, things like that. So relevant questions to the customer.
Good. How many people answered your survey?
We're gonna go around like
Hundreds.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
close
you
to 100.
literally interviewed 100 people at the gym?
Yeah, well, we just had them come over, we told them about the idea, we had them fill out a
Good for
survey.
you.
Yeah.
Awesome. We talked about that last week too.
Yeah.
Good. Nice job. Does anyone else want to share? Who else was here last week? Do you want to share?
Sure.
So anything you learned? Did you talk to anyone? Did you get any more teammates? Introduce yourself and what your project is.
Hi, I'm Mike, and our project is a biodigester in Haiti. I guess you could say the foundation for the physical biodigester itself is already in place, but we'll need to sort of resuscitate it and get it operational. And obviously we can't interview the people who directly be utilizing it. So what's important for us is doing a lot of research, finding out as much as we can about the structural and operational parameters of it as possible, and figuring out, most importantly, what went wrong before and what can be done to fix it. This time, a biodigester, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it takes waste and it essentially digests it through a bacterial metabolic process to produce fertilizer and methane fuel that can be used for cooking. And energy and sanitation are both significant problems in the third world, in particular in Haiti. So one of the things that we've been doing as a group since the last meeting was we've been putting an emphasis on having a very well-defined problem itself, as opposed to just digging into the solution and looking at who's going to be using this, who's going to use it after it's up and running again, sort of the chain of custody of the device after we're no longer careful and things like that.
Good. Thank you. Any questions for this team or this team? So, so last week Mike stayed after asking a couple of questions, and I just want to bring this up. So his project, he said they already have that technology there, but it's not working. So why aren't they using it? And that's where sustainability comes into play. So I told him about a conference that's actually held here in Lowell each year. It's called the Dishwandi Symposium. It's held in June. And last year we had a guest speaker, Jeff Hoffman, who's actually the co-founder of Priceline.com. For those of you who don't know what Priceline.com is, you can get cheap flight tickets, cheap hotel tickets. So he has a lot of money, he wants to do good, so he actually traveled the world looking to make a difference. So he arrived on some random island, or I forget exactly where it was, but they were poor, or most of them were poor. And so he gets off the boat, and some people come and they greet him, but some people don't. They don't really know what's going on, so he asked the people who knew what was going on, like, what's up with these people? Why aren't they interacting? And it's because they were deaf. So if you're deaf there, you're just an outcast to society. No one cares about you. You're basically left alone. There's no help for you. So he did some research and he found out that a company actually made hearing aids for these people to help them hear. And he said, okay, so why aren't they still using the hearing aids? Well, when the batteries died, they didn't know how to fix them. They didn't have batteries to replace them, so they stopped using them. So that's not sustainable. So he actually made hearing aids with a solar-powered battery. So now that's more sustainable. So try to think about that. So that's what I brought up to Mike. I'm like, well, why don't they use it? Do they not have the tools? Do they not have the knowledge? Do they not have the equipment? So these were built. Why aren't they still using them if that's such a big problem? So when you're investigating your problem, your opportunity, and your solution, try to think about that. All right, and now I'm going to pass it off to Tom O'Donnell. Thank you very much.
Hey guys, can you all hear me? All right, thank you. I appreciate being here. Sorry for the AV issues. Looks like there's a bad connector on the back of this duck kit. So we're not going to be able to use that. We'll work with it overall. So tonight we're going to talk about assessing the opportunities and mapping what you guys are thinking about into the value proposition, the value for those individuals, those customers, those people that you think you're solving the problem for, right? So, real quick, let me show of hands. How many right now have a clear understanding of who the customer is going to be for what you're suggesting? Pretty clear? So give me an example.
So hi, this is Peter. So we work with Naval, which makes 3 printed prosthetic hands for kids. So we focus primarily on, so this group is for as well.
Do you guys like the whole group thing? Yeah. How many are on this team? Okay.
So amputees is a pretty defined population, but that kind of focusing on young children and adolescents. Though it's not necessarily limited to that, it does.
So when we talk about the value proposition, it's not just who you're solving the problem for. There's another aspect to it. Anybody care to venture a guess? It's not just solving the problem for the customer, but to be successful in the market, in that space out there. Who else are you thinking about? Yeah. What other solutions are out there right now that are trying to solve the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So it's not just you're solving the problem for the customer, but you're solving it in a way that is differentiated from what's out there. It turns out better, faster, cheaper, easier to use, more integrated, more environmentally friendly, more whatever. So we're talking about this, we're talking about that as well. So when we go through today and talk about this stuff, keep that in mind. Not just solving the problem, but doing it better, faster, cheaper than others are doing. So all of you, hopefully, are thinking about taking your ideas from where they are today, pretty much in the idea phase, hopefully all the way to the point where you have something out in the market and they're going to have that impact. And going through all kinds of different stages, from the idea to a prototype to a first customer product, all the way out to the end where you actually have an impact in whatever space you're playing. Right? And how many of you are thinking that you're actually going to build a company around this at this point? I'm not saying you need to, but have any of you considered that at this point? Or pretty much it's more of a either a student project or something like something a little bit more aggressive. You don't need to be thinking about this right now, but I would suggest that as early as you can, if it's something that you're even remotely thinking about, that at least have that as a frame of reference. Because something. And as you think about that, as you're thinking about that, and as you're going through the competition for the idea challenge, it's all about positioning your project, your venture, in a way that the people listening to you can get a good understanding of, is what you're doing meaningful to the market? Is it something that can be technically achieved? Do you have the right team around you so that you can actually execute and make it happen? And are there any other issues around things like legal issues, regulatory issues, and other things that you need to be concerned about? So that when you put it out there, there's not a law against it. Or if you're doing something, for instance, in the clean energy space, or in the case of the hand, right? Are there any kind of regulatory things that you're going to need to figure out in order to bring that to market? So all of these risks that are out there, can you communicate in a way that says you've thought about them, you've done some homework on them, and when you bring your project forward to either customers, investors, partners, early employees, that they're going to look at what you're doing and say, yep, I get it, it's meaningful, and it's pretty compelling. So think about this from a value proposition standpoint. Venture 101. You as an entity, a company, has something that you believe is valuable. Value defined as what? The hand is an example. Value defined as what? What do you think?
Could you repeat that?
You have something that you think addresses a problem and would bring value to a community of users that would take it, adopt it, embrace it, use it, and it would either solve a very acute problem for them or make their life better in some way, right? That's the essence of a value proposition. Solving a problem, making life better. So here you are, a company, an entity, a group of students, bringing value to the market, to the customer, to the individual or groups of individuals who have that problem, who have that need that you're thinking about. And maybe you have information that validates that there really is a problem there, that there is a need there, or at this point, you think there's a need. That's okay, right? But from this point forward, going out and talking to people, talking to folks in the industry, and really figuring out if there's a need that your solution can bring value to. And if you do that, as I mentioned, it's either solving a very acute problem and is a painkiller, or it's more of a vitamin, making life better. All of you have to define which one it is and put some thinking behind it. Go out and talk to people in the market so that you can very clearly state that what we're doing is solving a problem in a specific space, and it's doing it in a way that's better, faster, cheaper than other things that are out there today. And if you can do that, what happens? Money back to you. Right? They'll pay you for this. That's a beautiful thing, because without doing that, it's just a student project, a science project, not a sustainable business. But for it to be sustainable, that revenue you bring in has to cover your costs and hopefully generate profits. And that leads to a sustainable model overall. So here's the question. And what you're doing, is the value significant enough for you to get enough revenue, enough monies from those customers for what you're doing so that it covers the costs, has some extra, the profit, to distribute, reinvest into the business, grow the business and move forward. You don't need to have this nailed for the idea challenge. The point of this right now is to have you thinking about that value to the customer, that value proposition to the market. So at some point, you can put a price on what you're doing. How many of you have thought, even remotely, about what you would charge for the thing you're thinking about from a venture, for the idea challenge? So, $100
For the weight clip?
for the weight clip. How'd you come up with that?
Based on the survey responses
Survey to whom?
to potential customers.
So you've done a survey
We've done one, yeah, we've done
to how many people?
about 100 people.
Ooh, 100 people.
Yeah.
How many responded?
How many years? Oh no, 100 people.
100 responded.
Right.
Very good. How good was the feedback?
It was.
First off, what's the product again?
The product is a weight clip that measures bar path and speed and a number of other things.
So it's a weight clip that's got some sensors on it
Right.
that provides some feedback into how your product is being used. Very good. What did you learn?
We learned that we need a kind of, our responses were mostly male, so we kind of need a more, I don't know how to say it, but we need more diversity, yeah,
Okay. Diversity. Good.
to be representative of the
Yeah, I feel
market.
like
That's okay. Well, what you're doing is a good thing. Instead of you thinking what the value is, what the price is. Now, in that survey, did you talk to the low price?
Yeah.
And the feedback was up, down, good, bad?
We gave them price range, and I think most of them said that they would pay about like $50 to $100 for a product like this.
Very good. Now, it may be premature to set self the pricing, but getting that feedback from the customer around what you're doing, whether it's meaningful, absolutely, it's never too soon to be talking about that stuff. So when we talk about this overall, and what each of you are doing, and how you're positioning your story for the idea challenge, and you're talking to the judges, and you're talking to mentors and others, ultimately, what they're trying to do is figure out what you're proposing. Is it meaningful? Is it compelling? Is it addressing a real problem? Is the team capable of moving it forward? Is there a real market for this? A real problem? Ultimately. So this diagram that I have up here talks about this. So, I'm sorry. The product, the solution, the technology that you're working on, is it interesting? Is it compelling? Is it unique? Is it different? Is it addressing the problem in a new and interesting way? Then, is there somebody out there who cares about it? Is there somebody who actually has the problem? And how well do you understand that? And then the third thing is, does the team have the skills, the capabilities to actually deliver on what you're talking about? Now, we're not talking about all of this today. But what this comes down to is the technology is what you're doing, right? The actual solution. The market, the customer, the need is why you're doing it. And the team you're pulling together and how you're going to execute is how you're doing it. I'm suggesting to you right now that as you go through this process of getting your story together and your plan together, that the more you can answer the questions around these three buckets, as what you have is compelling, why you're doing it, and how you're addressing a need, and then does the team have the capabilities to move it forward overall. So, product, team, fit. Or what you're doing, does the team have the right resources? Technical, business, other, overall. Secondly, does the team understand the market? But for the discussion we're going to do today, does that product, that solution, that technology actually address a real need? And that's where we talk about the product market fit, the value proposition. And everything else falls apart if you cannot clearly articulate this value proposition. In other words, who's going to care, why they're going to care, and how much they're going to care about what you're doing, and how what you're doing is truly differentiated from what's out there already. How many of you have thought about at all other solutions that are out there today that do something similar to what you're proposing? How so?
Well, they're already,
First off, what are you doing?
biodigester and heat.
So the competition, what do they look like?
So there was the non-governmental organization that came in and built a series of biodigesters. It was within the last decade. That was successful as far as installing them, but those were mostly kind of smaller biodigesters, kind of spread around. And after they left, there's really no one to care for them because they were not sort of handed over to the people. It was just kind of put there and stuck in the ground. So it's a proof of concept and it works. But it's difficult to put in some of these terms because we don't have market competition when it's selling.
That's valid. So in this situation where I was going with this is the solution that you're proposing, the product that you're proposing, has specific features, capabilities, functions that you're going to build into it. Those features, those functions are going to deliver benefits and value to the customer. Other solutions out there may deliver benefits in a different way, maybe at a different price point, maybe in a more reliable fashion, maybe in an easier to use format. All these things that you need to understand so that when you eventually pitch your solution to that customer, or you pitch your solution to the judges in the idea challenge, that you can communicate that, yes, here's what we're doing. It addresses this need, but based upon what's out there already, our value proposition is more compelling because we do it better in this way, we do it more cheaply, we do it in a way that doesn't require extremely trained workers or PhDs to operate. And that's where the value proposition comes into play. The value comes into play with your customer. From there, if that's not unique and compelling, you can put as much other stuff around it, but it probably will fall apart. So, ultimately, communicating this to all kinds of different stakeholders. For the sake of what you're doing right now, it's the judges for the idea challenge. But going forward, you're going to need to communicate this value, this story around what you have, who you're positioning it for, how you're doing it better, faster, cheaper to folks who are going to throw you some money, people who might want to partner with you, potentially early employees who come on the team and you can't pay them, so you give them a piece of the company. But for them to do that, they need to buy off on your vision, right? Because the only time they're going to make money is if the company is successful and it eventually makes money. So this story, this narrative that you're pulling together around why you're unique, why you're better, why you solve the problem in a much more compelling way, is at the foundation of your pitch, of your story overall. So as I was talking about, let's flesh this out just a bit more. So as a company, you're also, as an entity, you're going to need stuff to help you, whether it be materials, other supplies, equipment, money, actually do what you need to do. Now some of that can be stuff that's readily available overall. Some of it may be a little less readily available. As I mentioned, some of that's money. But ultimately, as you're telling this story to the customer, you need to position yourself versus all those competitors that are out there today. So in your story to the judges, one of the questions they're going to have is, okay, how are you unique? How are you compelling? Because if you cannot tell that story, you're probably not going to be able to, first and foremost, position with the customer, but as importantly, position with all those other entities that you're going to need to work with. The suppliers, the investors, and how many of you thought about how you're going to get your solution into the hands of your customer? Are you going to sell it to them directly? Or how many of you have a software app? Any of you? Software app? None? Usually there's a lot of software apps.
Well, you guys over there kind of have an app. So there's the technology linked to an app.
Right, so the weight clip is going to be connected to, like that's where all the data is going to go to.
So this weight clip that you're talking about, are you going to put it out on Amazon? Are you going to send people out to the customers and sell to them directly?
We can export it here to our...
The suggestion here is that you're also potentially going to need to work with folks like Amazon, folks like Walmart, folks like some of the entities that are in the countries, the non-governmental organizations and others who will help you distribute your solution to the customers. The point of this overall is to lay the groundwork of why the value proposition is so important. If you cannot communicate how you're different, how you're better, how you're more efficient, how you can solve the problem in a more effective way, none of these people are going to listen to you. Customers, suppliers, channel partners, investors, others, overall. that make sense? I was hoping to use the overhead more. Some of this. So, when we talk about how many have crafted even the semblance of a value proposition. The value proposition is not a sales pitch. It's essentially the essence of why, of what you have and why it's better, faster, cheaper. All those other variables than what's out there already. Any of you? No? That's okay. We'll get there. Value proposition, as this states, is essentially all the pieces that encompasses what you have and what you're delivering, but as importantly, to whom you're delivering it. Because that's the customer part. It's how what you're doing actually addresses that need and solves the problem, right? But as importantly, it also includes why what you're doing is better, faster, cheaper. Whatever parameter of comparison that you're using, whatever you pick, how are you better versus those parameters than what's out there already? Now, in each one of the spaces that you're playing in, one of the first things you need to define is those parameters that I just talked about. So, I'll go back to the biodigester. With that biodigester, what are the parameters of comparison versus other stuff that's out there do you think is important versus potentially other solutions? So if you go to a customer and says, here's my stuff, it's great. I want you to adopt it, pay me money for it. They're going to look at you and say, okay, great. Are you better than what's out there already? What are some of those parameters?
So that would include the rate of methane production.
Okay, let me give you this.
So those would include the rate of methane production, the rate of solid fertilizer production, the estimated cost for maintenance, and definitely the amount of input waste that can be treated per unit of time.
So, give me those again, real quick.
The rate of methane production, the rate of fertilizer production, the cost for maintenance, and the amount of waste that can be treated per unit of time.
Good. So if you were the customer, in this case, right? And here's something that I'm going to emphasize. And before the end of tonight, we're going to do an exercise. We're going to think through this. When I think of the terms that he used, rate of methane production, rate of fertilizer production, the capacity of, what was the last thing? Capacity of what?
To treat the waste,
Oh yeah.
the amount of waste that can be treated.
So those speak to technical features, essentially, right? When we talk about value, what we're talking about is embedded are the features and functions. But what we're really talking about is the benefit to the customer. So I'm going to put it back on you. Can you frame rate of methane production in terms of a benefit to the customer? What do you think?
The customer gets more fuel for cooking.
The customer, okay, more fuel in a shorter period of time at a higher quality with potentially less environmental impact at a lower price point, right? In any of that, did I talk about technical features and functions, right? So that's the challenge, right? And in all of your stuff, the tendency is to talk about the capabilities of what you have. The requirement is to then take that and translate it into the benefit to the customers in terms of the things that I just talked about. Efficiency, cost, reliability, ease of use, stuff like that. Because those customers, yes, you may think they buy based upon technical capabilities, but ultimately they buy based upon benefits that you bring to them, defined in terms of business benefits. So all of you start thinking of translating. So for instance, the hand, right? The hand and the capabilities of the hand, and delivering those capabilities to potentially folks who do rehabilitation and others, right? Could translate to increased increased results, so better outcome results in terms of what are the terms for when a patient goes through therapy? The outcomes, right? So better outcomes, less cost because it's more efficient, easier to use, so you don't need a high-skilled person to deliver that capability. The cost is something, maybe the way it's structured, it's more reliable, so you can use it 100 times versus once or twice in order, and then it fails. So that's the point of the value proposition. And translate what you have in terms of features and functions into business value for that customer in terms of real benefits. And that's the structure of the value proposition. Does that make sense? So, here's our first exercise. I'm going to ask you to walk through this in this format. And bear with me, you'll probably never talk through this format to anybody else, but it's a good exercise. We, this entity that you envision coming together, and you may not, but just, it's an exercise. Sell a product to a specific customer. That customer has a specific problem. Okay? And you may not know right now, but be creative. We solve this problem in a specific way, and our solution is differentiated from other solutions in these 2 or 3 specific ways. And it could be cost, it could be ease of use, it could be whatever you choose. And what I want you to be thinking is not where you are today in terms of, because you guys may be very early on, right? Think of it in terms of where you think you're going to be a year, 2 years down the road. And that puts you in a frame of mind of being a little bit more aspirational overall. Does that make sense? So, think about it in those terms. I have something that I envision as a solution. It's addressing a specific need for a customer. It does it in a specific way. And this is how it's better. In whatever parameters you choose to select. That's part of the exercise. In whatever space you're working in, that's part of the task. What are those points of comparison? Because ultimately, you are assuming one specific thing in all of this. What do you think that is? You're putting something forward, eventually, into the market, and you're assuming what?
Someone wants it?
Somebody wants it, right? Because why? Because it's better. Because why? You're moving in the right direction.
Things would be easier for them.
Because it's easier for them. Take it a little further. And this is ultimately an assumption that all of you have that you're going to need to validate by going out and talking to all kinds of different people. You have an assumption that what you're bringing forward is going to bring value in a way that's going to fit into a gap in the market, right? A gap that says the needs that are out there are not currently being addressed fully by the solutions that are currently out there, right? Because if there wasn't a gap, why even do it? Because you're going to be bringing a solution forward, a product forward, into a very crowded space, and people are going to look at you and say, so what? Who cares? You're not different than what's already out there. So your assumption going in right now is that there's a gap. Have any of you truly thought through that at this point in time? And said, in the landscape of solutions in the space that we're looking at, I can point to a very specific gap in this broader market that says, yep, that's a space I'm going to focus on, and my solution, our solution, is going to fit that gap, and fit in a way that inserts into that gap and creates an opportunity for my solution. I'm not saying you need to at this point, but at some point, if you don't think through that, what's going to happen? If you don't think through that before you bring your product to market, what do you think is going to happen in most cases? What do you think? Nice and loud. You're going to fail. Why? Yeah. Chances are that you're going to, okay, you've made these assumptions that what you have is valuable, and you go deep dive with your team to build a solution, and you don't listen to the market, and you go 6 months, a year and a half, whatever. You come up for air with a solution, you bring it to the market, you put it out there, and say, hey market, here's our great solution. And the market looks at you and says, it's meaningless. Or maybe, just maybe, you get extremely lucky. And the market says, your customers say, wow, this is fantastic. How did you know? This is great. Which is more likely? Did you come up for air and you say, here it is, and they love it? Or you come up for air and it's, you run into a wall? Probably the latter, right? Now, I'm not saying doing what I just said is the right way. Did you go deep dive, invest a lot of time building it, and then come up for air? Throughout this exercise with DifferenceMaker, one of the things we're going to pound you on is it's talk to the customers, talk to potential partners, engage with folks throughout the entire process, get feedback, and that's going to inform what you do. So that as you're moving forward, if you get some feedback that what you're doing is wrong, well, you can adjust. That's fine. You go forward this way, you get some more feedback. Oop, you hit a wall, you can adjust. And eventually, you'll get to a point where you hopefully will be successful. And that may be completely different than what you thought going in. But that's okay. That's okay. So let's go back to the value proposition. Your value proposition is assuming that there is a gap. So, when you think through this, the types of things that I want you to really focus on is, are you succinct about what your product is, what it's doing? Are you specific around who your customer is? Who has the problem and what that problem is overall? How are you addressing that problem? Is it compelling? And probably to me the most important part is, how do you think at this point that you are differentiated from what's out there already? Because ultimately that's going to allow you to insert into those gaps, right? Because if you're not differentiated, what's the point? There is no point. Either that or you're taking what you're doing and you're throwing it at the wall. You know, stick it against the wall, see it from stick. That's not the best solution. So let's take 10 minutes in your teams and just think through this very quickly. Come up with a real quick value proposition. Does that make sense? You can use the big sheets. Is essentially
It's when you actually get the UTI, that's when
potentially cover
Right, exactly. But,
so like you're trying to
the ultimate goal, I think,
prevent a person
of
from
delivering products and services. to
right,
all.
and right now they aren't preventing that. They get it. They have some
Yes.
discomfort, they have.
This is the solid problem. The salt that you get at the end of plants anyway, you take it because that enriched.
High cost of energy and unsanitary waste disposal.
These entities are doing things, I think, that are similar to what you're suggesting. So my question to you would be, how are you going to be doing that differently than these other organizations? So that when you go out to folks like the foundations and others for funding, other organizations like, just throwing this out there, the YMCA, UMass, Lowell, or whoever. Let's just, two quick ones. You guys want to volunteer? Good. Just read real quick.
So, for A, our product is 3D printed prosthetic hands. Our customers are children and adolescents without hands. And no problem. Okay. Prosthetics are expensive, and without our product, the kids would not be able to afford hands. It helps the kids at a younger age be able to receive prosthetics. It gets them used to being in a social environment and not being, usually kids without hands, they tend to get made fun of so they can fit in. For our value proposition, we can print the hands faster with 3D printing, and our hands are at 1/10 of the cost of normal prosthetics, and they're more accessible at a younger age for children to be able to receive prosthetic hands and get used to the hands without having to pay for a very expensive prosthetic.
So when I look at that, right, the stuff that I like, hands are 1/2 to 1/10 the cost. Very clear differentiator, right? That allows you to focus on that. They can be printed by 3D, and that's more of a technical capability, what do you think the real business value to the customer is for being able to 3D print? Potentially speed, right? But also, it can be done in a much more geographically dispersed way. It can potentially be customized in region, right? Not as much direct labor. So translating the fact that it can be 3D printed into more of a business value. Now, the fact of the matter is, other people can do 3D printing, right? So is there anything unique about how you guys do 3D printing that makes your approach more interesting?
I guess.
What specifically around the 3D printing? Maybe you've come up with a new model, a new method, a new material. I don't know, I'm making it up, right? Because you could. You potentially could come up with an entirely new material that could feed into a 3D printer around your solution. That would add additional value, right? So anytime you talk about this stuff, if somebody else can replicate what you're doing, if somebody else can replicate what you are doing, and you make a very interesting market opportunity, what's potentially going to happen? So you're out there, you deliver your stuff to the customers. You get hundreds or thousands or millions of customers embracing your stuff and doing it. But somebody else can come in and do the same thing. What's going to happen?
That's why when you're going to make a product, you kind of have to think. In terms of technology, it becomes obsolete. Technology can become obsolete very quickly, so you have to think ahead, almost 5-10 years ahead of the technology.
Yeah, the bottom line is, if that value proposition is not compelling in a way that's going to protect your ability to keep doing what you're doing, you may have an opportunity for a month, 6 months, a year, but if you create this huge opportunity, other people are going to jump in. So your value proposition ultimately defines your competitive advantage versus everybody else. Does that make sense? So the clearer and crisper you can get it, the stronger your position in the market overall in delivering your solution to the customer. So I had a great question about for-profit versus non-profit. And specifically, does this stuff really matter if I'm a non-profit? Is that the question?
Well, how does it apply?
How does it apply? Because if you're a non-profit, who do you need to convince that what you're doing is compelling?
Your employees?
Your employees, yeah. If you're a non-profit, who are the other groups of individuals that you really need to convince? Investors, but they're usually called what? Donors, foundations, government agencies, non-governmental organizations who are going to write you checks. Because why? Not out of the never out of the goodness of their heart.
Companies can get tax write-offs for like donating to companies that looks charitable on their benefit for doing this.
20 years ago, yes. Today, no. Take it one step further. People give you money if you're a nonprofit because what?
They see a benefit in it.
Okay, take that a little further. They see a benefit in what way?
To benefit themselves.
Keep going. Anybody else?
If the project or venture is successful, it will improve the company's image.
You're going in the right direction. If they're a foundation, a government organization, an NGO, okay, they have their own problems, which are what? The problems of the folks that you're trying to address a problem for. We talked about the homeless, right? The government folks in Lowell care about that problem, right? The foundations care about that problem. And the only reason they're going to give you money is if you convince them what? Make some
There's a good solution
Yes.
that employs them.
that you can solve that problem, right? They're not going to give you money today. 20 years ago, yeah, tax write-off, great. But I would challenge you today, foundations, government grants, other dollars, that, yes, they get a tax write-off, but they also want to make sure that what you're doing is going to address the need, solve the problem, and move the ball forward. So all of this absolutely makes sense for that as well. You need to convince them that your solution has value, is doing it better than what's already out there, and you have a chance of succeeding. But they're going to say, so what? I'll go to the other guy who has a better solution. Because why shouldn't they? If the other guy has a better solution, they'd be better, they would have a better result if they put their dollars with them. Am I right? So you need to convince them that what you have is better.
Would it then be fair to say that you're actually selling your solution to those agencies?
Absolutely.
Because I know a lot of people, when I was walking around looking at the discussion, they were saying, if we're a not-for-profit, we're not maybe really selling something.
Okay, here's the deal. Do not convince a legal status, a nonprofit legal status, with the focus on becoming a for-profit entity from how you run your business. Even as a nonprofit, you want to make sure you have enough monies to continue on your mission, right? And the only way you're going to do that is if you have a value proposition to those donors and funders, and also, quite frankly, to the customers. Because in many ways, those customers have the resources to buy from you. Their Social Security monies, their food stamps, their other stuff, and even some monies that they've generated through jobs to buy your stuff as a nonprofit. But they're going to go to you only if you do it better than anyone else. So don't confuse a tax status with a business focus overall. Make sense? Question? Oh, I'm sorry. We have a little diversion. We have some guests from the marketing course, marketing research course. And they would like to steal 5 minutes of our time. And please introduce yourselves.
Hi, boys. My name is Leo from the marketing research course that I'm taking.
Hey, it's Daniel Rivera, marketing research. Course that we're taking with Professor Ross. And we're doing a project for our marketing research class. And we pretty much need a focus group to do our research on, to do surveys and create a hypothesis as well. So that's why we're here, to bring the DifferenceMaker to go. Try to get contact information about you, your group. Pretty much question how you guys came up with the product that you came up with, and create the analysis and survey on pretty much everything that you guys have been doing as far as that goes.
Like any difficulties that you guys had, like we're all in, like every part of your whatever you're doing on your innovation, just let us know, because the more information you give us, the better results that it's going to give us for our projects and stuff like that. So don't be shy.
So if any of you guys want to give us the contact information on one of you guys, and we'll contact the rest of your group, or give us some information, that would be fine. We appreciate that. And that's pretty much it. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, so if you guys want to just take down like a pen or a pencil or anything like that, my email address is Leonardo, like Leonardo DiCaprio, but it's like _ signs, SAENZ at student.edu, all that. So yeah, if anybody interested to work, if all you guys want to actually just want us to, like, you know, to help us out with it, everybody feel free to. Well, the more information we get from everybody, the more feedback we can give to you guys, and the more we can help each other. All right?
Your email one more time.
My email is again Leonardo _signs at student.edu. SAENZ.
So Leonardo _SAENZ at student.uml.edu. Excellent.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Holly, time-wise, time check?
It is 7 o'clock, about another 3 minutes.
3 minutes, right. So we talked about the value proposition. You're probably going to be adapting this many times over the next. Hey, we're rolling the punches. Now, how many of you think that you have only one customer, one type of customer? So in other words, so one type of customer. So if you had to define that customer, what would it be?
Children and adolescents with applicants.
So every single child and adolescent without a hand would be exactly the same. In terms of, and where I'm getting at with this is, do you envision potentially multiple solutions with multiple capabilities, multiple features, different price points, different integration with other stuff? Right? So if that's the case, it potentially could be dozens, right? The point of me saying that is that one of the challenges all of you are going to have is in the broader space of the market. You need to be able to focus and identify those groups of users who are going to want your solution. And for each one of those groups, you potentially can have a separate value proposition. Some of them may care more about price. Some may care more about features. Some may care more about reliability or a different basket of features and functions. So as you're moving forward, looking at the broader space, identify multiple, what we refer to as customer segments. And those customer segments have different characteristics. So for instance, on the buy and register, could you envision right now at least 2 or 3 different customer segments? What would they be? Not to put you on the spot, it's a great example.
So, different sites, different locations would have different needs for, as far as volume for the buyer digester. So, they would need these implemented in different sizes with different capacities. And also in terms of, if you think of the customer as the foundations that we could be pitching to, they could also have different perspectives in terms of what they're looking for from whatever projects they want to invest in. So more geared toward humanitarian causes, more geared toward exposure, things like that.
Good, thank you. Let's take it in a different direction. Do you envision this only being used in developing nations? But that's probably your first market. Are there applications in first world countries? Are there industrial applications? Are there residential applications? Are there agricultural applications? Right? So there are potentially multiple different market segments, customer segments, each of them having similarities, but in many cases also having unique requirements that you can then take your solution and fine-tune it in ways that allow you to differentiate in those spaces in a much more compelling way. Does that make sense? So here's the challenge. All of you need to go and list out what those customer segments might be. Don't censor yourself. List them. And at some point, after doing some research, you're going to have to come to a decision around which one, basically you're going to prioritize. Which one we're going to attack first, which one second, which one third, overall. And then flesh out those value propositions for each one. And that will then inform you what you then need to do to go out and talk to the various customers, put that value proposition in front of them and say, hey, if I am this type of a product, this type of a form factor, at this price point, with these types of features and functions, it will allow you to solve your problem in these ways in much more compelling fashion. Would that be meaningful to you? And they'll say yes or no, or maybe. And that'll help you to refine what you're doing overall. But the key is not to look at the whole space as just one homogeneous, ubiquitous customer space. Does that make sense? So defining value propositions for specific customer segments and knowing that there's not one value proposition that fits all. You can have multiple. You can have dozens. Yes, there will be similarities based upon what you're doing, but you can fine-tune that to address those specific market segments. So ultimately, it's about that market positioning. Each customer segment is allowing you to take that broader space and fine-tune it. So you clearly and crisply understand who's my customer, what's their needs. Are their needs similar to others? How do I position with them? Are there unique requirements overall? And ultimately, are you positioned with them? Now here's an interesting question. When we talk about those customers, and you go to them and try to position your stuff, yes, there are direct competitors, folks who are doing things that are very similar to what you're doing. But there are other things you need to consider as well. Specifically, they may decide to do nothing at all. Or they may decide to solve their problem in a way that's totally different than what you're talking about. So if I want to get from here to downtown Lowell, transform myself from here to downtown Lowell, what are my options? Come on. What are my options? Walk. What else? Ride a bike. What else? Take a bus. What else?
Your own car.
drive your car, what else? Take a taxi, go Uber, whatever. All these other things that are out there that are solving the need that my customer has. But if I'm selling bicycles, right? And I'm focusing just on other bicycle manufacturers or bicycle service companies, what's the risk?
Saturated market.
Yeah, you forget about all those other areas. The term we use for those are substitutes. It's not a direct competitor to what I'm doing, but it's a way that my customer has chosen to address their need using something completely different than what I'm thinking overall. So what I'm suggesting is that you need to think about that. So keep that in mind. Don't worry about this slide. I just wanted to put it up because it's used in business classes to talk about how industries as a whole are structured. The things to focus on here is, yes, there's competition around folks who are actually selling stuff that's very similar to what you are selling, and that rivalry overall. But what I just talked about, substitutes. My customer may decide not to buy a bike, but to walk everywhere. Southwest Airlines, what's their business? Planes. They transport people via planes. Their first market was in Texas, between, I believe, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio, I believe. At the time, nobody was flying between those markets. Where do you think the competition was? Trains, buses, cars. It's that short haul market. Southwest came in and said, hey, you have no idea. Short haul, plane transportation in markets that they're attractive, where the only alternatives people had was driving, buses, potentially trains. So they thought about it, and it wasn't, I'm competing with other airlines. What did they think? I'm competing with other substitutes. So my value proposition needs to be structured in such a way that I'm not better than United Airlines, that I'm not better than American. I need to be better than what? The buses, the cars, the folks driving themselves. So just think about that. And ultimately, as you're doing that, thinking about how to get your stuff into the hands of the customers and figure out how to work with folks who are delivering to you all the stuff that you need, materials, equipment, other supplies, dollars, funding. So that you can position yourself in a pretty compelling way among all these. So that's really what we're talking about today, is to think through and understand what's my core value proposition, how do I craft it and create it in such a way that I can clearly articulate my differentiated value in terms that are meaningful to all my stakeholders. And just so we say it again, who are those folks that we need to communicate to? Come on, who? Customers, suppliers, partners, early employees, potentially government regulators. Because in some cases, depending on what you're doing, you're going to need to convince them that, hey, we're solving a big problem. You need to write a new law that allows us to do this. Or you're going to create a regulation that allows us to do what we need to do. Are there potentially any regulatory issues around something like this? Like the FDA and other stuff? Yeah, a ton. So what if you could go to these folks with a value proposition that was so compelling that not only would they create new regulations, they would fast track you through the process to allow you to get your stuff out into the market. It's up to you. That's at the foundation of what all of you are doing. Value proposition, customer segments, and picking who you're going after, how you're going to go after them, and why you're going to go after them. Now, let me ask this question, and we'll close up on this. And we'll do a little Q&A. Can you articulate to me what that perfect customer segment would look like for your stuff? So, and what I mean by what it would look like, what are the characteristics in terms of their problems, the market they're in, other stuff. So the perfect customer for your stuff would have what characteristics? Based upon our discussion today. Go ahead. The perfect customer segment for your stuff, in a general sense, okay? What would be those characteristics? Because you have those quizzical looks on your faces. I'll jump in and get the ball rolling, okay? That they have a pretty compelling need, a pretty compelling pain point that is currently not being addressed by existing solutions, right? So a compelling need that's not being addressed. As opposed to, yes, they have a need, but there's a bunch of other folks out there already addressing that need. And I'm going to talk to Holly about this one. Holly, how many times do we hear projects where the teams come in and pitch a solution where it's an enormously crowded space? All the time. All the time. That's extremely difficult. Try not to do that. So, a compelling pain point that's not being addressed by anybody else. Give me another characteristic. They got deep pockets, right? Deep pockets. That is regulatory support for what you're doing, so that you don't need to change any laws, right? That all the materials and the supplies and the equipment that you need to do what you're doing is readily available. You don't have to reinvent a new material. I get this great. Or you don't need stuff that's extremely expensive. You know, like a new material, unobtainium, or extremely expensive. Making those up, guys. Smile. It's a joke. Come on. What you guys are tough. Thank you. Right? So you don't have to do that. That the manufacturing processes for doing something like this are already there. You have to come up with a new process, right? That investors have demonstrated that they're looking for companies in that space. I'm working with a company right now that is doing alternative, high-protein, low-environmental impact fish food. And one of their competitors just raised $30 million. That's a pretty compelling space, right? So anyway, so those types of things. Compelling need, it's unaddressed. It's a market that I can deliver stuff to, because all I need is readily available. Here's one that I forgot, that the partnerships that I need to put in place are pretty straightforward. Whether they be partners I need to bring my stuff to market, or partners I need to help me build my product. So in the case of what we talked about here at Lowell, some of the partners that you need are folks like maybe the YMCA, CTI, the City of Lowell, as an organization overall. So anyway, pick those customer segments that are more attractive first. Don't try to fight an uphill battle. And always have a second and third one ready to go right behind it. Does that make sense? Now look, actually, let me throw up one last thing, because it puts something in perspective that I think is important, especially as it relates to what you're delivering and who you're delivering it to. And I think we talked about it from a sensor standpoint for your project. The automotive industry. Take a look at this real quick. The automotive industry is probably one of the worst industries that you can ever want to go into. Pain in the ass, very crowded, competitive, difficult to break into. The large companies, what we call OEMs, Ford, GM, and others, have a lot of control on the market. But suffice to say, many folks try to break in on an annual basis. So what this shows is all the types of stuff that goes into an automobile, all the way up to the dealers who ultimately deliver it to the customers. So materials get integrated into components, the raw materials, components, subsystems, engine, battery, shocks, the systems themselves, braking, transmission, suspension. They get integrated into the vehicles, then get put out into the dealers, ultimately to the customers. The point on this is understand whatever industry you are in, what they call a value chain looks like. And ultimately what it means is, who am I going to be, who do I need to get stuff from, and who am I going to be selling stuff to make my business successful. And forget about everything else, for the most part. So, this is important, because ultimately, you could be in multiple spots. We just had a conversation, Lowell, about your solution. You guys have a sensor technology. That sensor technology could be integrated into a broader solution. That broader solution could be then delivered in a service package to the customer and ultimately then delivered to the customer. So, who you are buying stuff from and who you are selling stuff to depends upon what you actually are. If you're a sensor company, you're buying the materials and other stuff from companies downstream from you, but then you're potentially going to sell that to other companies who are going to integrate that into solutions and deliver that to the ultimate customer who's going to use it and get value from it. So what you need to decide is where you float, where you sit in this value chain. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And the only reason I say that is how you pitch your value does depend to a certain extent on who you're pitching to. If you're pitching ultimately to the end user customer, how you structure that can be different. If you're pitching to somebody else who's going to take your stuff and integrate it into a broader solution, you structure that a little different. We will definitely help you folks as you go through this and how to position this overall. But just keep that in mind. Value proposition defines what you are and who you're solving the problem for. The market segments dictate how you can position that, and then where you sit in that market defines on how you structure that overall. Questions? And this applies to all of you, for-profit, non-profit, service business, product business, you name it. Questions? Now the worksheets that you picked up. The tools that you've been given. You've all seen the worksheets. Yes? They got them last time too? Okay. These are structured in a really compelling way around the problem, the opportunity, the solution, the resources. To get you thinking along that, but stitched within this and throughout this is that value proposition and who those customers are that you're going to be focusing on. So they go hand in hand. So I would recommend to continue. How many of you have had a chance to work on this at all yet? Yes, no? Very useful exercise. Because a lot of the questions that you answer in these worksheets actually go into the value proposition, go into who you're targeting from a customer segment standpoint, go into how you position within the market overall. So please, take a look, leverage them, and move forward. Now, as somebody who's been involved with this since the early days, ultimately, what all of you are going to be doing is telling a story about what you have, how it's compelling, why it's important, and who's going to care about it, and that you're in a position, ultimately, to move it forward, to get it done. So, the product, the solution that you're pitching, that's the what. The problem and the market, the customer who has the problem, who you're addressing the need for, that's the why. And ultimately, all the resources that you're pulling together to address that and to move this forward is the how, the execution. But at the core of all that is how that solution that product, that thing you envision, actually fills that gap that we talked about, addresses that need in a unique and compelling way that's differentiated enough, underline that word enough, from what's already out there, that's going to convince folks, the customer, to move away from what they're already doing and embrace what you're doing. There's a lot of steps in there. And you're going to change and adapt that a lot. But if you don't have a clear understanding of that value proposition today, it's going to be a very challenging exercise. But we're not going to ask you to just spit out value proposition. What we're going to ask you to do is to stitch that into the story so that when you go up in front of the judges, and they're going to look at you and say, wow, neat stuff, addressing a real need, and those guys get something, we think they can actually get it done. They got a diverse team, they can communicate well, they've already demonstrated that they've gotten something done, they've put together some interesting partnerships. Yeah, they're worth some money because the value that they communicate to us is compelling, it's unique, it's clearly articulated, and I can see the differentiation and how they address that problem and fill that gap. If you can do that, you will do well in the competition. If you can't communicate the value proposition, you'll struggle. Plenty of time to really crisp it up. And just to finish with this last point, pick the customer segment that you want to focus on for the competition. Do not try to boil the ocean. Do not try to be everything to everybody. But communicate how, if you solve it for this customer segment, that what you're doing can translate into those other segments in a pretty straightforward way. It may take a little bit of changing, but that's what you're convincing them. I'm solving it here. I'm focused. We're going to nail this. But then, look at all these other things we can go after. Because our value proposition translates into these other areas, but maybe with a little change. That's okay. But focus, please. Focus, focus, focus for the idea challenge. Does that make sense? All right. Questions? Answers? You guys are tough. Was that even remotely helpful? If you cannot articulate this, you may get lucky. Maybe somebody will work with you because you're good looking or you can bribe them, but whatever. I'm teasing. All right, Molly.
All right, Tom, that was awesome. Thank you very much. Let's give Tom a round of applause. That was very helpful. A couple of announcements. Workshop number 3 is next Tuesday, February 23rd, and Tom is the guest speaker at that one as well. So I urge you all to come. I think you'll learn a lot like we did tonight.
Can I share 2 quick things? I forgot to show something. Anybody know what that is? What? Look, he has it, that's why. What do you think that is? IV bag? Any others? What?
Aquarium pump.
Filter? Closer. Aquarium pump? Closer, but even closer. What do you think? Ooh, who said water filter? Even closer?
Siphon?
No. getting better, yeah. Let me give you a couple other tips. This opens up, stuff can go in here. No, I'll give it to you. There's a reason for this, okay? Because the guy who came to me talking about this could not clearly articulate his value proposition. And I kept pushing him. It's a toilet bowl cleaning device. And by the way, the guy spent a lot of money. He got a patent on it. Okay? So, probably you know this. So, if you will, there are two diaphragms inside here. So think of one baggie in the front, one baggie underneath. Okay, so this water gets put in here, okay? And basically, this hooks to the water flow on the bowl. This just dumps into the back of the tank. The guy puts toilet bowl cleaner into the top, right? When you flush, the water comes in and puts pressure here, puts pressure on that diaphragm. That diaphragm puts pressure on the other diaphragm and forces the fluid out into the tank, right? So he comes to me, he goes, I got this great thing. I spent all this money. It's not like 50 grand, right? He goes, I think it's a great thing, great thing, great thing. I go, okay, what's your value proposition? Why is this better, faster, cheaper, more compelling than what's already out there? He couldn't answer the question. Be careful.
At the end of the story.
No, here's another one. This one's a good one. Oh, he never came back. And he left the prototype in my office. Yeah. Wow. I get all kinds of stuff like this.
So you have a $50,000 Nesquik bottle.
No shit, right? Have that, please. So, can you guys see this? And I wanted to show this. So, if you can, if you look at this. So, this right here is a standard tungsten welding torch, arc welding torch, right? I don't want to jump in. No, I don't want to jump in again. Okay. So, these torches can be used to actually not only connect two materials, but can also be used to gouge out material in all kinds of different applications. And I'm working with this guy right now. In environments that are contained, for instance, inside ship hulls, and contained buildings and other stuff, all that material gets spit up into the air, causes all kinds of issues. Not only from a health standpoint, but also it can contaminate the other stuff that's being worked on. So, what do you think? What do you think this is? What do you say, man? It's a vacuum. This guy is a welder here in town. He's been welding for 35, 40 years. Anybody see that movie? The one, the Coast Guard boat that went out and rescued the folks in the 50s? It's one that's out right now. It's called, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, they filmed that whole thing in a dry dock down in Quincy. He welded all of the jigs that they used to move stuff around, break them out. Anyway, so he came up with this, well, why don't I just connect the vacuum, and because it was getting overheated, he also connected a water source that could cool this whole area, right? So working with him right now, he's got a pretty strong value proposition. He's already out there talking to users, and all of them look at him and say, yeah, just tell me when you get it. But the challenge is this. He goes to the users. The users see this great new technology, this great new competitive technology. They go to market. Who does he need to go talk to? So the end users are guys like General Dynamics and Electric Boat and the military contractors and others. But the folks who are actually going to make this are who? No, the torch guys, right? The torch guys are selling competitive stuff. So if he comes in with this solution, he may put some of their stuff out of business. So his value proposition needs to be so compelling that he attracts folks who still want to come to that, even with that potential disruption. So anyway, I wanted to share that very compelling value proposition. He's actually get some patents on this already. That's it.
Glad you showed that. All right, so February 23rd, next Tuesday, same time, same place, right here. Tom's going to be the guest speaker again, so I urge you all to come. If you know other teams who could make it, all of the resources will be uploaded online. Last week's are up there. We're just waiting. Hannah's finishing editing the video, so that should get tomorrow. She'll get tonight's up in a couple of days. So if there's any questions, feel free. Tom and I will stick around for a little bit. Other than that, thank you all for coming. Keep working hard. Email DifferenceMaker@umall.edu if you have any questions. And we'll see you next week then. Have a good night. Thank you.